Awesome. Oh my, I'm still getting used to that opening. I'm absolutely loving that opening. But good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to Working It Out Across Generations, another episode. I am Justin Hurdle Price.
And I'm Dr. Lynne.
And we are a mother and son duo who simply provide their generational perspectives on everyday conflict that is affecting everyday people like ourselves and shaping how we coexist with each other. And so we're here to provide some solutions to some of those things. We got a really juicy topic today. And it's actually, I'm going to dive right into it, to be completely honest. I'm excited to get into it, so I'm just going to dive right in. Today, we're going to be talking about a very common question that we get asked, considering that we both work in conflict resolution. We both are experts in our own respects in that topic, and from our own experience of how to resolve some conflicts that a lot of people do go through. We're going to be talking about if violence is ever the answer to resolving conflict in any sort of situation. Now, again, as I said, this is a very common question that we get asked. People often assume that because this is the work we do, that we think there's no need to use violence, or there's no need to, in which a situation could promote or advocate for that being the way in which you handle and receive safety, right? But at the end of the day, that's not the case. That's not what we think. And I think you'd be surprised to find out what we think about if violence is ever the answer to resolving conflict. And personally, I think that, just to say now, it definitely depends on the situation. It depends on your environment, right? We work a lot and have worked a lot with young people who have struggled in, a lot of respective neighborhoods in which that is a way in which that they have to keep themselves safe. That is one of the tools that's in their toolbox. And a lot of people often say, well, you shouldn't fight. You shouldn't resort to violence. That's something that you should just take out of your wheelhouse completely. Whereas I really appreciate your approach, at least, Mom, to your conflict resolution work and how you've instilled this into my brother and I of, the reality is that's a tool that's gotten that person up to where they are now, right? So if they had to fight their way out of certain situations and they're still here, right, that is a matter of, something that we don't want to take away from them. We want to, if anything, as we've said before, and we'll continue to say, add to their toolbox and say, there's just another option.
Yeah. I love this topic because, to be honest, I have changed my view on this topic over the years. And it's surprising, I think, for a lot of people because I've been doing the work of conflict resolution for over 40 years. And the majority of people in the work that I do in the field that they really do believe in nonviolence, period. That is always the way. And that was my belief for a long period of time. But I'll talk about kind of leading up to it and where I am right now with it. But this was an important topic to me because violence is everywhere. It's something that you see on a really large scale, right? We know wars are big. That's like the biggest conflict that you can have. But wars do not start out of nowhere. And one of the reasons why I wanted to do this topic is because I want each of us to understand that everyday conflict that gets resolved in whatever way it does, it lends itself to building a climate of who we are and where we are as us, as a people, as a neighborhood, as a community, as a city, as a state, as a country, as the world. If you think the way that you treat your neighbor, your family, your friends has nothing to do with where we are in the world today in terms of the way that conflicts are getting resolved or that wars that are happening, then I would say I totally disagree with that. We all can lend ourselves to adding to creating a climate where we are much more peacefully coexisting, Hey, we're in the
I was
woods, and
gonna
oh
say,
my
what is
gosh,
going
we're in
on?
the woods and the lights are flickering. Hey, well, hey, we keep going.
Absolutely, yeah, we do.
But in any case, I really wanted to talk about that, our own one-on-one rather, responsibility of where we are today. If you think, hey, it's all the politicians, hey, it's this person, it's that person, I would love for you to consider that what you do actually matters as well. I'm as always, I kind of read up on these topics
Yep.
beforehand because I'm always interested. Like, are there even articles on this? And this one, I knew there would be articles, but what was interesting in one of the articles that I read is that it said in the United States that less than half of the people who live in the United States have said that actually, I should say it was a survey of 7,000 US men, not because we couldn't survey everyone. But in any case, these folks said that they had never had a fist fight in their life. Less than half had a fist fight, and I'm always intrigued by that kind of information because I think it's higher. Look, I started working in schools, and I saw a lot of fights over the years that I worked in the schools. But what's also interesting in the articles that I read is that it really isn't just our young people, that grown folk are throwing hands. And we are, to be clear, talking about physical violence because there is such a thing as verbal violence. And we'll probably do a different episode on that. But we're talking physical violence, throwing up your hands, getting into a fight with someone. That's really what we are talking about right now. And plenty of adults are into using that as a method of resolving conflict. So it's an interesting thing because I thought there would be more fights at schools, and there's actually more people who engage in fighting have said that they fight more off school grounds. And I know that there are young people who are smart enough to know there's higher consequences if you fight on school grounds, but that's not what the article was talking about. It was just talking about not in school, and a conflict happens outside and you're throwing hands. I don't know what you think of the article, from your generational perspective.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I think as much as that article and that story was interesting, and what I read from that, I think what else is striking me is the fact that we had pretty much two senators getting
Yeah.
into a conflict that almost resulted in physical violence right then and there, to which, Bernie Sanders is the one that's stopping the entire conflict, right?
I'm loving it.
So I think, like, I'm going off of that, right? I
Right.
think it's very telling just that these are things that, when you don't actively try to feed a change, when you actively don't try to, you know, advocate for using these other tools, or the exposure to other tools,
Mm-hmm.
this is exactly what happens, right? We see this at the end of the day, that we saw the humility in our senators, right, in some of our government in that moment, as words were exchanged prior, and things of that nature led up to that entire exchange, right? But at the end of the day, think about, you know the everyday people
Right.
that are going through similar things and have more access to handle those conflicts in harsher ways,
Right.
right? These are two senators. They knew, with the attention that they had on them, right, they knew they weren't going to fight in that moment, right? We all knew that. But I think, at the end of the day, it's very telling of, if these are two just grown adults, right, on that scale, right, on that stage, to allow their emotions to get to that point. It has me very, not concerned, but I'm definitely
I'm
looking
concerned.
out. I mean, I don't know.
I'm concerned because
Right.
I'm not positive. I'm not positive that they wouldn't have thrown hands. I
Really,
really am
I don't
not.
know.
I mean, one stands up. Come on, where
Yeah,
are
I don't know.
you? And there's people that are watching you. I feel like the whole thing of who you are and what you rise to is an interesting thing because on one hand, people want to be known and influential, and right, and then on the other hand, they don't want to be role models. Don't look at what I do. I'm not a role model. I mean, come on. I'm sorry. I do not believe you can have both ways. So I do not believe. Watching that video, I don't believe that they weren't going to fight. I just don't. I've seen too many adults just go for it, and I was surprised by it that they went for it. So I just don't have the faith in it. But if we're not talking about, we're not here to do the whole show on them. But if you didn't see it, you really should.
It's very
you really should. One of them was a former MMA fighter, and he's the one that stood up right out first. Anyway, so it's like, wow, this is where we are, folks. I'd love for those folks who are watching. Have you ever had a fist fight? Have you ever wanted to fight someone physically? Love to have your comments, because at the end, y'all make comments. We definitely will get to them and talk about them. But interesting articles. But I really want us to think about ourselves, right? I'm the mom, so I know I'm responsible for you. Your dad and I are responsible for how you were raised, and particularly around this topic. I will say, for me, I can remember getting the distinct message that we shouldn't be fighting, and that my mom was the kind of person that could, I think I said this the last episode, she could tell you off without cussing you out, and you got told off. So she truly believed in the power of words, and that we should not be involved in fights. I don't remember her ever saying, if someone hits you, hit them back. I remember her telling, go tell a teacher. And what's interesting, which complicates the situation a lot, is that we were growing up. By the time I was 7, we were going to schools in an all-white neighborhood, right? And that meant something in terms of your behavior, whether you agree with it, know it, see it, believe it or not. As Black people, we are often seen as representing Black people. And one person does something wrong, and
it's our entire community.
Yeah. And I can remember being raised with that mentality that eyes are on you. My mom in general too, even if I'm not with you, find out what you're doing. Like, you really have to be on your best behavior. And fighting was not one of those things that would indicate that you were on your best behavior. And then when I went to college, I got introduced to conflict resolution as a major. And that really gave me a whole toolbox of different tools that I could use. And then when I became a parent, unfortunately, my mom had just passed away by then. And so I didn't have her guidance, advice in my ear. But to be honest, I talked about this earlier too, it freed me in many respects, because I was able to parent the way I wanted to. And when I started using the conflict resolution skills myself and teaching them to our sons, I felt like I got an even wider and more full toolbox. And I felt like it was going to be a good thing. Your dad and I both felt like it was going to be a good thing for you all to learn how to talk things through, because again, the spotlight was on you because we sent you to private, predominantly white institutions, and from elementary school on up, and we knew eyes were going to be on you, representing who we are, right or wrong, and that fighting was only going to create larger consequences for you than it would for your classmates. And you want me to say now where I'm at, or you want to talk? Okay, well, now where I'm at is, I said this to Justin last night. I said, when and if I have grandchildren, I will say to them, if somebody hits you, you hit them back. And you hit them back with the intention of letting them know, don't you ever put your hands on me again. And that's a big place for me to have come to. But I am honest in that I feel like we all should be prepared in any situation. I'm not asking you to start a fight. I think, like I said, if you look at that video, there's so many videos I'm sure you can look at, but you look at that one in particular, it's like, no, there's no need to threaten violence or to want to take it to hands in so many situations. So I'm not asking for that, but I am saying that there are people out there, number one, who want to test you, number two, who actually want to hurt you physically, and you should never be in that position. And hey, I understand about nonviolence. Don't come at me with, but nonviolence, I know what nonviolence is about. I know that it was my major, nonviolent conflict and change, Syracuse University, studied all the movements. I know Dr. King, Gandhi, all of that stuff. And it is great. And it has been powerful and useful. However, I do feel like if you aren't prepared on the other end to be in situations where you do have to defend yourself because somebody's trying to hurt you physically, then I feel like you aren't prepared. Like that is something that I don't ever want to do again to anybody else, especially my sons, and which was what we did, and I stand that we thought it was the best thing. And now, as I look back, I would say I'm all for nonviolence. I'm all for having as many of those tools in your toolbox and using it as much as you can, but also being able to discern when this is not working and I'm about to get physically hurt or at least threatened, and so I need to be able to defend myself.
Yeah, that's very interesting that your answer has shifted, because I think my answer has stayed the same, in that, if I need to defend myself, I need to defend myself. And I think that growing up, not only being fed the message of, walk away, go talk to someone, find someone, and have them handle it, right? Again, I was also in the work of conflict resolution, right? So I was going to school with a completely different lens than most 10, 11, 12 year olds are, considering that this work actually became a very, integral part of my life, uh, very quickly. It wasn't just like a summer job. This was something I still wanted to do, something that I was interested in exploring outside of just my stipends here and there as a kid.
Stipends, you got
right? Yeah, right. Well, yeah, I'm just, it came in the form of stipends. You can't give a 12-year-old a
right.
check.
Okay.
So, but for instance, there were plenty of times in which I, especially being in these, PWIs, where I felt like I was representing my entire community. I felt like, my actions were bigger than just me, bigger than just how they can be received in the building, right? In the campus, excuse me. And that was very hard to walk around holding for, every day as a young person who especially had the skills to discern for themselves when I felt like, okay, I tried here. Like, I tried this skill, I tried this, I tried to have this conversation, I tried to even go to the adult,
Right.
and do things that way, right? Still didn't work. And at that point, I had felt, okay, well, I know what I want to do the next time something happens, right? But as I'd said in, I think it was last episode or episode 2, for young people, for kids, their biggest thing is not disappointing their parents, right? So I had felt like for a long time, with all of these, things happening, that if I had responded the way that I'd want to respond, I'd be disappointing my family. Like, it was that extreme.
Yeah.
Even though I was just 12, we would be like on the jungle gym or on the field playing kickball and stuff. And, as dumb as it might have been, like, it would have made more sense to probably duke it out then as a 12-year-old than to wait until I'm 18 to get into my, first real altercation. And so I think for me, like, yeah, there was a lot of damage done in these institutions in the sense of, some bullying here and there, right? Because again, what kid is out here trying to use conflict resolution skills at 13? Like that's not heard of, right? So of course it's going to be looked at as weird, as all that other stuff, right? Weak, right? All that other stuff. And I think I think a lot of it was bullying because I had let these ideologies kind of take over for me, right? Even though I had known since birth kind of like who I was, in the sense of like this is me, this is what I want to explore, and I don't really care who you are, in the sense of like you're not telling me anything outside of what I want for myself, and how I want to be there for myself. And so I feel like it was, again, I use this term a lot, just it was kind of like, I was just in a walking tug of war with myself for a lot of my educational career prowess, whatever, simply because of the pressure that we put on ourselves due to a bigger issue here, right? But I had upheld that pressure, and I had kept that weight.
And that was really look, again, like I said, I know the movement, so I know that with nonviolence, there are a lot of times when you choose to not respond to violence with violence, or to respond with only nonviolence. I recognize that. So if people come at us for this, just like, well, that's what using nonviolence, sticking to nonviolence is about, I will say that you especially were the kind of kid that actually would use violence very quickly. And just like that was your answer. And I am very sorry that we didn't try to shape that into how and when, and along with giving you the message and the skills of that you need to really be talking things out, or need to go to adults and I know that it could be a very controversial message for people, but I don't care. I have to say that I really do believe that you do have the right to defend yourself, and some folks really don't learn any other way. And if you show them, for the most part, I mean, for me, I had to really think about this, because is violence making conflict worse? Like, does it always make it worse? I know in many situations it does. I've seen it, I've lived it, I recognize that, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. But I really want to put that question out to you all. Does violence, physical violence, always make the conflict worse? If you got a comment on that, give us a comment. If you just want to think about that. But I have seen, even during my days when I truly believed that, yes, it only makes it worse, right? That it only escalates conflict. I have seen examples where it actually didn't. It's interesting. I can recall, as we were talking about this, like preparing for the show, I remember my mom talking to me about when she was, I don't know if it was middle school or high school. I don't remember that. But I remember she was being bullied, picked on by this girl, and she really didn't want to fight her. She was afraid to fight her. And so she would run home. And cruel as it was, one day she ran home and my grandmother wouldn't let her in. And she told her, "You have to fight this girl. I'm not letting you in the house until you fight this girl, because she's always going to be picking on you."
Wow.
Yeah. And
fight her or no dinner. Wow.
Fight her or no getting in your house for safety.
Wow.
That's really
which is, yeah, but I mean, wow, just the person, I've never heard of something like that.
And my mom said that she was so terrified that she beat the mess out of that girl.
I don't blame her. Like, yeah, I'd want to go to bed too.
She beat the mess. But the other thing is too, my grandmother was also very cruel at times in her punishment of my mom. So I think that might have also been her motive. Like, I either get this butt whipping or I go home and I know what I'm going to get. Right. But she said anyway, and it ended it. The girl never bothered her again. And as somebody who's worked in schools, I've seen that happen a few times where the person has not wanted to fight. It's usually been girls. I will say, I'm not stereotyping girls. I'm just saying it's usually, that's where I've seen it. And when the girl finally decides that she's going to fight, and she fought, and that was it. It was over. And I'm not saying that's not always the case, but I don't know. What's your thought about whether it always does violence always make the conflict worse?
No,
Justin?
I don't think that at all. I think at times that is exactly what you got to do in some way, shape, or form to end the conflict, right? And I think that for me personally, it just takes a lot to get me to that point. Mm-hmm. I know that for a lot of people, life happens, things happen, and trauma can be a factor in, why that's a reason as to why people resort to that so quickly. And while I completely acknowledge that, I think that, in these situations, you have to think about, really what it means to you, why, and, as hard as that is in these moments, that really is what the discerning of when to use these skills looks like, right? Why would I take it there? What about this is bringing me to this point, right? And I think that, for me, a lot of situations in which I would have used violence, or I would have, tried to defend myself or anything like that, is in situations where I've voiced that I wasn't comfortable with whatever was happening, or I wanted whatever happening to stop, right? Whether it was the way I was being spoken to, or just whatever it was, right? Just putting it out there that, look, this is going in a direction that I'm not cool with, right? It's bringing out a reaction in me that I'm not cool with. And I just don't want to escalate that, right? So I would ask them to stop or see if I can remove myself from the situation. And at least in my generation, people don't take no for an answer that well, right? As people see that as a time to egg the situation on. So, in times like that where you really do try to talk things out, you try to use these skills, you lead with that humility first of, this is someone who could be having a bad day or having a bad reaction to something, right? And doing that discernment, right? When you go through all of your tools and it seems as if that other person's just not getting it, yeah, I'm not opposed to a sock in the face. That's just something I'm not opposed to. And I think that I'm so not opposed to it because I was fed the idea that I needed to be opposed to it for so long.
Yeah.
And by the people that I cared about.
Wow.
And whose opinion I cared of the most. So now that I'm an adult and I've shifted my values, I've made my own values, stood on my own values.
Or return to
old values, right? Like really, yes. Really relit some of those sparks in other things. I know for me now as an adult, and then, one day, my biggest dream is to be a father one day. So one day when I have kids, I know for sure it's never going to be any of this, you're never going to have to use these skills, or you're bad if you ever use these skills. And not that you ever said that, or not that my parents ever said that, but that's definitely the message that gets relayed as a young person, right? Our brains are very black and white. Things are very extreme for us, at these ages. And so, when you're fed that as early as like 8, something like that, or the opposite, that really does shift into later years. So I'm using my discernment skills now more than ever as an adult when I get upset, angry, when things do bring me to that point, because, there's more consequences now. I'm over 21, I'm 22, you know what I mean? So I can't do those same things. I can't respond the same ways. I can't,
tell that to the adults who are
absolutely right. The adults in Senate who would have happily just, risked everything. Right. but the reality is, I can't do those things like the way that I could have, on the jungle gym, on the football field, or on the, recess, whatever, playing grounds. And so, yeah, the discernment is definitely, I think everything
Yeah.
now more than ever, in a time in which people love to act first and then ask questions later.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it is, I know that it can be very problematic to use violence. We wanted to just name a few situations in which it is problematic. We certainly think that it is. The first one is in a relationship. Y'all should not be putting hands on each other in a relationship. That's just not. First of all, that's abuse. Second of all, it is just not going to resolve anything. It creates more problems, more harm. It's against the law. I mean, it's on and on and on and on and on. And it just shows that there really is not the kind of love and maturity, if that is what you're going to do in a relationship. The second is not fighting fear. For me, I have seen so many things over the years. Like the older guys when I was growing up, or certainly maybe not when I was growing up, when I was working in schools, right? So early on 20s, and when I was in my 20s and 30s, I would hear some of the older men saying there's no such thing as fighting a fair one these days. Like there's never a one-on-one. People have to jump in, and that's way back, right? That they were saying it. And I agree that really does make things worse. It's very problematic in a conflict where if at least if that is what you have decided is going to happen, that you then bring all of these folks in who are now ready to just jump when they feel the urge. Not if you lose in the fight. That don't happen, right? That's not what they're there for. They're there to get their kicks off, and that is problematic.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something you'll definitely see a lot of it. My generation for sure. It's definitely not a fair one. It's more of a one-on-one until, yeah, someone does start losing, and if that person starts losing, then even in times where people are separating the fight, that seems to be some sort of signal or a signal that's misconstrued for hopping in and things of that nature, right? So it's interesting, especially when you think about what is a fair one and what that looks like and where, right, and how, and the reality is, I just wouldn't say the street is where you want to have anything resembling a fair one, right? I think that if you're going to have a fair one, probably best to do it in a controlled setting, right? Some headgear, some gloves, something like that, or even not headgear, just gloves, doing things of that nature, and really putting some regulations around it. There's plenty of things. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but there's plenty of people out there in different areas who are actually using just like their backyards or their platforms to host certain beefs that people are going through, right?
No, I've not seen that.
No, listen, in a controlled setting, to box it out, as opposed to being out in the street. See how you just quickly judged it? This is the person who taught me never fighting and all that as a kid. You see how quickly she judged that? And I told her it's in a controlled setting to make sure that these are people who don't handle it in the street. And I think that things of that nature, for me,
I think
a fair one makes more sense than just being out in the street, and where fair game is fair game. Anything is fair play.
Yeah, right? I think I just so opposed to it.
Yeah, we know. We saw in that moment. We know you're opposed.
I said,
we know.
And I do believe that you should be prepared to defend yourself. I just so opposed to it. Just feels like it's the answer these days, and even before these days, because I won't put it on your generation, because it's been for a long time. And for me, that in itself is problematic, which actually leads into number 3, where you have no other tools. The only thing you know how to do is fight. That's problematic, because there are in other circumstances, some circumstances, opportunities to really talk. Nobody wants to hire somebody who only knows how to throw hands when they're upset or even use verbal violence when they're upset. They need to know that you are able to manage yourself in a way where you do discern that you're in some kind of danger physically or you're not, and that you try to talk. Doesn't mean that they're asking you never to get angry, or no, it doesn't mean that they're not asking you to feel your emotions. They're asking you to be responsible for what you do with those emotions, because if the only thing that you can do in your mind is to hit someone, challenge them to a fight and go through with it, then you are unskilled. You, just like I said on the other side, right? If the only thing that you know how to do is to talk it out and you don't know how to defend yourself, I think that that's a skill that you need to get. And it doesn't mean that you have to use it all the time or at all, to be honest, but it does mean that it's there in your toolkit. And if you don't have any kind of ways to resolve conflict other than throwing hands, you need another tool. You need more stuff in your toolkit. And that's why we do what we do, as Justin said, is that we're not trying to take it out. We're not trying to say, I'm not trying to do what I did to him. All right. I own it as the mother. I own that. That's what we did. We took that out of your toolkit, or we told you never to touch it if you still left it there. I'm trying to say, leave it there, but add to it so that you actually can start to look at conflict in ways where you can build the skills of that, the vocabulary of using the power of words, right, to resolve conflict rather than always resorting to physical violence.
I certainly agree with this one. I certainly, still agree with your approach. Because at the end of the day, for me personally, I love that I have options, right? And I love that I've worked on even just specifically the skill of discernment to know really why I'm upset, what's really to be upset about. When you really think about it, a lot of the everyday stuff that people are upset about and that people fight over or escalate to violence are over some of the dumbest things ever. Like, I had someone in my personal life a couple years ago completely try to bring something of violence over, like, I think it was a parking space or something like that. And I'd literally never been in a situation like that, so I thought it was kind of laughable at first. But once I saw it was getting to that, I obviously had to make sure that I was cool. But when you really think about it, the reasons as to why people do bring it to those levels are way bigger than whatever is the prompting event, right? It's something within them that's heightening the emotions, that's heightening, and elevating the reality, obviously, of what's really going on. And so, while that's real, and again, I do appreciate the approach. I do know and recognize that it is a tool that, in a world like we live in today, we can't say that we're never going to have to touch that tool. And I think that for me, it's more, if we are going to have to go there, if we are going to have to take it there, and if it's possible to get it into a controlled setting, then that's the way to go, right? If it's possible that we've tried to talk it out, we've tried to really, de-escalate and things of that nature, and it's just not working, okay. But the reality is, just having the option, right, and having the discernment skills really definitely helped me just to identify for myself, like, on a value scale, like what would make me want to bring things to that level.
Right.
So I'm grateful for that, but definitely not passing that to my kids. No, hell no.
Well, I gotta say this too, that I watched somebody in my life go from just constantly either cursing you out or ready to fight or fighting, to learning how to do things differently. But I will say this, that I'm going to say in her 50s, this is my aunt. Shout out to my aunt Della. I don't care. We all know, love her. She's no longer with us, but shout out to her and her spirit. In her 50s, she said to me, I still love a good fight. I miss fighting. So if that's you, trust that we're not discarding that. For you, it may be something that you really love. It's a release or whatever,
and it's an art. I'm not gonna lie.
Yes,
boxing, too. Martial arts.
Martial arts. We understand arts, that, sure. But it can be very problematic when that is all you know. So we don't want to leave you there. We want to just give you some free techniques that could be helpful to you, whether you are using the conflict resolution skills or not. If you're not and you're a fighter and you're looking for, well, then what else am I going to do? Because people are ugly out here, right? And people deserve it, or whatever your thinking is right now. So let's show them the first one.
Awesome. Yeah, so the first one that we come up with is just pause and think, right? I think a lot of these skills that we're going to be addressing right now are simply around the discernment, right? That you're able to do, prior to these things happening or when these things are happening in the first place, in the moment. And so pause and think is huge, right? Take a second to really think about, as I said, asking yourself some of the questions of, what's really going on here? Why am I upset? What's prompting this reaction out of me? What's prompting this reaction out of them, right? Possibly, if you could, being able to even step into their shoes, right? Possibly to see where they're coming from, things of that nature, right? Just to de-escalate, and just really to help identify for you, as I said, for me personally, this is where I start to bring up my values. I start to bring up what's really important here, right? At the end of the day, sometimes I completely understand your respect is more than ever everything to stand on. I'm more of a respect over love person anyway, so I completely feel that for my people out there who feel like their respect is more than enough to stand their ground. However, there are people out there too who recognize that there needs to be something deeper, right, to really take it there, even though in that moment they may not know what it is that's bringing them to those places. And so really just being able to, internally ask yourself these questions, as you're externally dealing with the problem as best as possible. Right. I think that's like one of the most effective things that you could possibly do. I don't know if you have anything on that,
No,
but
good.
yeah, cool. So as far as our next one, we've got recognize that there's just room for more tools, right? At the end of the day, we are all people. We all have strengths and we all have weaknesses, and I wouldn't even necessarily call them weaknesses. I would just call them pre-strengths. Even though we can't cover, even though we can't cover everything, that's personally what I would say, especially about the things that we want to get better at. But I think for a lot of people, uh, who specifically struggle with using other tools, right? We understand that fighting is an art and a discipline, right? So those people definitely have a completely different lens on the experience of it than the average person, right? But the average person who's been through a lot, doesn't have that exposure, doesn't even have really just that advocacy around them to handle things differently. We think it's really important for those people specifically to you know not be afraid to you know uh, dive into their pre-strengths, dive into the uncomfortable feelings that come with trying to make something that was once a weakness or a pre-strength into something that's something routine and culture for you. That is a process, that's a change. But I think at the end of the day, people see weak or hear weak or weakness, and I think that's something that like stumps them from wanting to even start that process of turning any kind of weakness or pre-strength into something that really is routine and culture for them. So to even do that, you have to recognize that, okay, yeah, I can't cover everything, but of the things that I value that I haven't covered yet, where can I start and how can I start? Even just voicing that into the universe, I'm telling you, the universe will definitely give you the opportunities from that point to exercise that skill.
One of the things that brings you to that place is that how much consequences are you getting, and what are they? And it tends to happen the older you get, the more that if you only use violence, the consequences get larger and larger, right? And weighing whether or not they're worth it to you is pretty important. If you're starting to look at things like getting arrested or getting seriously hurt or seriously hurting someone else and then having to get arrested for that, or charges for that, or if it's losing relationships for you because folks are tired of every time you turn around you want to fight somebody rather than having the skills to talk to them. I think that that's what tends to lead people to start thinking about, hey, I need some more tools here.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And for our last one, we've simply got just, question, clarify, understand. As I said before, this is a lot of just discernment stuff, but specifically here, just trying to, I think paraphrasing for me is one of the biggest, superheroes or, not even superheroes, superpowers I have. Excuse me, I'm the superhero. The superpowers that I use personally, because I feel like a lot of people don't even know exactly what they're saying in the heat of the moment. And so when you're able to play it back for them, or just, in the form of a question, like, am I making sure, I'm hearing this right, or I'm receiving this right? Is this where this is heading, or is this what you mean to say? Is this how you mean to come off? Right? These are things that I feel like just completely help not only de-escalate, but help that person really understand and identify for themselves. Also within you doing that yourself, what's coming up for them and what's making them uh, escalate the conversation and escalate the situation. And once you get that clarification, it only makes it easier to understand from there, whether you agree completely, disagree completely, just being able to put yourself in other people's shoes. At the end of the day, we are human. There are things that, can overtake all of us. And we don't know until they happen. So if it is one of those situations, being able to, you know, be the bigger person, as much as that sucks sometimes. Like I'll be completely real and say it. As much as I love my job and I love what I do and I love, preaching this stuff, like I'm not gonna lie, being the bigger person sucks sometimes, especially when you grew up being the bigger person. However, and it cost me. Oh, it cost me a lot. However, at the end of the day, being able to put yourself in someone else's shoes is something that very much, in the long run, I think, for preservation of energy, can definitely help for sure.
And also using this one helps you to decide whether or not this is something that is really worth throwing hands for, right? At some point, you've got to get to that place of knowing that you've got to really decide if this is what you're going to continue to do, how you can continue to engage in conflict for the rest of your life. And a lot of times people don't question or clarify. And what happens is they really don't understand what the person has just said. They just assume their own meaning. And often that meaning leads them to the reasoning of, yes, I need to punch this person in their face. And it could have been something different if you really understood, right? You questioned, clarify, and then begin to understand where they're coming from, what they were really communicating to you.
Yeah, and a lot of these consequences, as much as they can be external, right? You could lose a job, you could be kicked out of school, you could be locked up, right? Something, right? You could have something happen on the external. I think the biggest, thing to weigh is it worth the internal consequences? Is it worth the exertion of energy? Is it worth the burnout? Is it worth the, possible down the line sadness or possible down the line regret, right? Is it worth any of those emotions that can come up on the interpersonal scale? Because at the end of the day, those interpersonal things only get reflected into your external world and your external lens. So just keeping the thought of just that everything's connected, that's really why I say that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, here's the thing. It just came to me. I know we're going to do an episode on social media, but people love watching fights, and I'm always interested in that psychology. Like, what is that about, y'all? So maybe we'll cover that when we do the social media episode.
But shout out to the fighters. It's an art. It's a beautiful thing.
I know that's an art, but sometimes a lot of the stuff people are not watching it for the art.
You're right.
They're watching it for that person.
Right. I'm watching for the art. I'll say
okay,
that. So shout out to the people who appreciate it.
Hey, if anybody watching, you want to write in and tell us what is that about? Yeah. Because it's not just youngins. It's not just young folk. There's a fascination to it, and I know part of it is a release. To see someone getting hit, it sometimes releases something in you, but I feel like it's brutal. It is something that I just don't understand. But anyway, that's not what this episode is. So we won't go into it there, but give some thought to it, please, because that would really help me when we get to that episode.
Awesome.
All right. So this is I could talk about this for a long time, and I know that there'll be some interesting conversations with folks in the work who may have very different views, and that's okay because I've come from the space of working with young people and watching their views evolve over time and them gravitating toward using the skills. I'm okay with adults who have said, I really do not advocate for violence in any form, and I'm okay with me and where I am on this because I'm not advocating for violence. I'm saying that the way that we are living and just in general, it's like bigger than, yes, there's a lot of violence out there, but it is to me about being fully developed, being able to handle all kinds of situations that come
Yeah,
your way. And in
absolutely.
that sense, I do believe things like martial arts and boxing, those are arts, and that you should be instructed in that. You should be able to handle yourself in that way. And hey, just interesting topic. All right. We are gonna close today's episode out. First of all, please make sure that you are following, subscribing, liking us on our YouTube channel, Working Out Across Generations. You can find us there. Watch us live. Watch us live on our Facebook page, Working It Out TV show. And of course, watch us on E360 TV. You can get the replays on E360 and you can watch us live. But we want you to make sure you like, follow, and subscribe and tell folks. Let's get an audience in here because we really want to make sure that you're getting all the good stuff
Absolutely.
across the generations.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for tuning in. We appreciate it. And as we say, conflict is here to teach you something about yourself. So just go out and find out what that is.
All right, we'll see you in the next episode.
See you, everyone.